This episode is sponsored by Realtor.com, who wants you to take advantage of your free profile on Realtor.com. By claiming and completing your free profile, adding a photo, and all of the information that puts you head and shoulders above the competition, you're on your way to receiving free leads, helping search engines find you, and staying top of mind with past clients. To learn more about claiming your free profile, go to Realtor.com/profile.
Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today is our special guest, Laurie Benner. She is Associate Vice President of Housing and Community Development. She is responsible for developing, implementing, managing, and evaluating innovative national programs designed to advance research programs and policies that provide equitable access to homeownership, housing, economic, and other opportunities. Her primary focus is to spearhead the Keys Unlock Dreams initiative, which she's going to share with us a little bit more today. It is a 10-city program aimed at expanding affordable and fair housing options, increasing the homeownership rate, and related benefits for people in communities of color, preventing an unbalanced recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and closing the racial wealth and homeownership gaps. So, wow, that is a lot, Laurie. We have a lot to get into today, but first, welcome onto the show.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that is a lot. I'm kind of tired just listening to you read it all out. It's a lot.
You sound pretty busy. But we're going to get into your realm of expertise and everything that you do. But before we get into that and our role as realtors and what we can do to be champions of fair housing, of housing for all, I want to hear a little bit more about you. Tell us your career background. How did you get started in what you do today? And tell us a little bit more about yourself and what's led you to where you are today.
Sure. That is another long and meandering story. So I'll try to, give you the cliff notes. Believe it or not, when I was in elementary school, I did not sit down and decide that I wanted to work for a civil rights nonprofit organization. That really wasn't in my path or in my goals. It kind of came about in an evolution, I'll say. One of my first real jobs as a young person was for a real estate brokerage. It was for a Century 21 office, and I was their bookkeeper. And then flash forward years later, finishing undergrad, which I didn't do straight out of high school. I was married and had kids before I decided to get serious and finish my degree. I can't say I recommend that path for anyone. That was pretty challenging. But I worked in the legal space as a paralegal, and in that started working in the nonprofit space for a land conservation organization. I worked for a title company. I worked for a title underwriter. I did housing redevelopment in Baltimore City for a nonprofit. And then I landed at Maryland Association of Realtors, where I was on staff for 6.5 years as director of housing programs. So after leaving Maryland Realtors, I transitioned here to NAFA. And so when I mentioned that it's been a long meandering path, kind of what I meant. It wasn't a linear path to get where I am today. I kind of took bits and pieces of interest in what excited me and what I felt passionate about with each step in each new position.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I always like learning a little bit more about the guests, hearing kind of where you came from, and it speaks to your expertise too, I think. So thanks for sharing a little bit more about you and what you do. And now you are kind of in charge of this world of housing opportunities and making sure everyone has access to housing. But I want to kind of start at the beginning. And I think that that's a good place to start when we think about where the U.S. housing market stands right now when it comes to fair housing. Because the history and what's happened in the past has a major impact to where we are today. So I know we could probably talk about this for a long time in the mindfulness of time. Tell us a little bit just about a brief history of housing in the US. What were some of the things that we've dealt with in the past that you see having an impact on where we are today? And tell us a little bit about some of the things that we've dealt with.
Sure. I think you really kind of touched on it when you mentioned how the history impacts where we are today, because for a whole variety of reasons, which, yes, you're right, we could probably spend a whole hour talking about just the history of housing. We know that there have been decades, centuries really, of laws and policies designed to segregate, discriminate, and deny opportunity to people of color. And those disparities have very, very, very real impacts today. Those inequalities still linger. And I think that the real estate industry as a whole and the realtor organizations highlighted and brought to light these disparities. There's a number of associations that have made apologies and have really increased. And some of this, comes down from the National Association, but really it was, local and state in acknowledging the past wrongdoings of the industry. So again, this history, this very painful history, again has impact today. It's not all ancient history, even though the Fair Housing Act will have been passed this year. It will have been 56 years ago. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act turns 50 this year. So even though these are decades ago, these laws and policies unfortunately have a bearing on the homeownership rate and contribute to the yawning racial homeownership and wealth gaps that we see in this country.
Yeah, it really does. And when I mentioned, we have to start at the beginning for this because so much of who we are as a country is rooted in how we were developing these housing projects and housing in general in this country. I mean, going back forever. And, I think too, people can think that, oh, well, we don't deal with this anymore. This was so long ago. This stuff is 50 years old now. We're good. We're good. Like none of this exists anymore. Talk to us a little bit on how you're seeing what has happened in the past being reflected and what we're seeing now, and just maybe debunk that myth that exists that no, we're good and we don't deal with this anymore. All of these new laws have been passed and we're in the clear and this isn't an issue anymore. Talk to us a little bit about the current state and kind of what impacts you're still seeing from the way we did things.
Sure. The statistics really don't lie. We have a almost 30 percentage point gap in homeownership rate between white individuals and Black individuals. I believe the most recent statistic is that white individuals have 10 times the wealth of Black individuals and 8 times Hispanic Latino. And so those statistics, the homeownership gaps, it's very clear that these laws and policies still play out today. We see it I'll give you an example, credit scores. We have these big gaps in between races and ethnicities in credit scores. Now, is that because entire categories of people are making poor financial decisions? No, absolutely not. It has to do with the formerly redlined neighborhoods and the lack of access to financial institutions. We did some research through our Keys Unlocked Dreams initiative and found that white neighborhoods can have over 90% more mainstream financial institutions than do neighborhoods of color. And so what that looks like is the white neighborhoods have traditional bank branches, whereas neighborhoods of color have check cashing stores and payday lenders and pawn shops. So they don't have the access. And you couple that with a frankly very well-earned distrust of the mainstream financial markets. And that's where these disparities in credit scores come in, which of course we know goes into qualifying for mortgage and mortgage declination. So it's this snowball effect that just happens. And that's just kind of one very minor example of how that's playing out today. And the other piece, because, I travel and speak on this all across the country, and I've heard the gamut of objections, like you said, oh, this is all in the past. We have these laws and policies now to shore these things up and make everything all good. So why are we still talking about it? because these inequalities linger, that's why we're still talking about it. And so there's a lot of racially specific solutions that are being proposed and being worked on. NAFA has been a huge proponent in our advocacy efforts for these things. So because race got us to where we are now, we need to use race explicitly to unwind it, to help make these policies more even, to shore up these gaps. And special purpose credit programs is one of those. So I don't know if you want me to mention something about that now, or if...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a good transition.
Yeah. So special purpose credit programs, for people who are not familiar with them, were made allowable by the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, COA, of 1974. So these programs, in layman's terms, what this means is a lender can create a lending program, a mortgage program, a down payment assistance program, specifically for a disadvantaged group of people who share a common characteristic, such as a protected class. And again, in layman's terms, that was not layman's terms. Layman's terms really is that a lender can create a program for Black people, for Hispanic Latino people. And that is done in full legality with the Fair Housing Act. And these programs are starting to come to market all across the US. We are seeing some objection and some pushback and some legal challenge. I'll give an example of a special purpose credit program that most of real estate professionals are probably familiar with, and those are lending programs for people with disabilities. That's a special purpose credit program. And I have never in my life heard one person object to those. But as soon as we introduce race and ethnicity into the conversation, that's when things start getting a little bit tense. But the bottom line is solutions like these, again, that are racially explicit, are tools that can be used to help shore up the disparities and inequities in our housing system.
This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations.
It's good to hear that there are some solutions, that there are programs out there that are existing that can help with this problem, because it is such, a massive thing. When we think about fair housing and just where it's come and it's the things we've dealt with in the past, and then you think like, well, how do we even begin? How do we even begin to start tackling this? And I know that is such a loaded question, and there could be so many different answers to that. But what would you say, as when we think about realtors and the role we play, and you're familiar with the realtor world being at the Maryland Association, and what is the role that realtors can play, to help assist in this? And how can we best equip ourselves as professionals to be a champion of this? And I know it's in our code of ethics, and I know, there's all the fair housing rules and regulations that exist with being a realtor. But in your opinion, what are ways that realtors can help with this, and what role can we play that will help ensure fair housing for everyone and equitable housing for everyone?
Sure. And I think that it goes a step beyond. You mentioned the fair housing laws, you mentioned the code of ethics. So of course, realtors, real estate agents are bound to comply with these laws and regulations, but it's not enough. I mean, we see over and over again that just the fact that my organization has to exist, just the fact that we do exist, and the fact that there are fair housing centers all across the U.S. means that folks are not complying with these laws and policies. If everything was all good, I wouldn't have a job right now, which frankly would thrill me, because, these organizations wouldn't need to exist. But going beyond just complying with laws, taking it further. So the Fair Housing Act, there's a provision of the Fair Housing Act that's called AFFH, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. Now, it is specific to organizations that receive HUD funding, that they have they're duty bound to go beyond and take extra efforts to make sure that housing opportunities are being extended to all people. Now, with that caveat, I think that realtors can take the spirit of AFFH and use it in their own practices. So this is where a lot of the DEI efforts come into place. That we see a lot of associations and a lot of organizations paying more attention to inclusiveness. So it's not enough just to obey the law. It really is, that's the lowest possible standard. Don't break the law.
Yeah, or I have to do this because, I'm legally abided to this because of the code of ethics. So this is, I have to do it. I love that you put it in that perspective. We need to be doing more than just, well, I have to do this because it's in my code of ethics.
Yeah, and that is very painful. Again, I've heard that plenty of times, and it's very painful knowing that the only reason that folks are complying is because they're compelled to, not because there's any spirit of wanting to do the right thing. But I think, again, realtors and real estate professionals arming themselves with the knowledge. So I just described special purpose credit programs. So learn about those, learn about other lending programs, learn about down payment assistance programs, and anything that's available in your area that can help foster more housing opportunity. When I was on staff at Maryland Realtors, unfortunately, I saw a lot of our members actively steering their customers away from certain down payment assistance programs because they thought that they were a hassle or that there was going to be hoops to jump through. I saw the same thing with lenders. Lenders actively steering clients away from particular loan products because they weren't going to make as much of a commission. And that, again, is pretty heartbreaking. So I know that realtor organizations are doing a great job of getting the word out there about these different programs that are available, for forging partnerships with housing counseling organizations. I think that that's another biggie. And really, there's a couple categories of folks that really kind of get all of the attention when it comes to home buying. And by categories, I mean there are the folks who are ready to buy. I want to buy a house. I'm ready. My finances are in order. I got a down payment. I'm good to go. Then there are the folks who are almost ready. They're thinking about it. They're kind of checking things out. Maybe they've got some credit issues to attend to. And, maybe realtors may put them in touch with a credit counseling organization or a lender, somebody who can help them on their path towards homeownership. Homeownership. But there's a whole other category of people, and those are the ones who don't even consider home ownership. They think it's not for them. I'll never be able to buy a home. It's so far out of reach. They believe it's so far out of reach for them that they don't even consider it. And so I would like to see some type of outreach, more in-depth education available for those types of people.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. And when I think too, as we think about just realtors and growing your business, we're always thinking about who are those next groups of people that we can reach out to. And that is such an important group, are those people who might think it's out of reach for them. But then what a service that we can provide as realtors to be able to go in and have a meeting with this person and say, hey, you might think that this can never happen for you or that you're not a candidate, but here's all the ways that we can do this, and what an opportunity that we can get not only to grow our business, but also to help those people realize that the dream of home ownership can be achievable. And here's how we can do it. And here's, as a realtor, here's the way that I'll help you do that. I think that is such a huge opportunity. When we think about, oh, there's no listings, there's no inventory, there's no all of this. Well, this is such a great opportunity for our realtors to be reaching out and helping these clients. And I think that I love that, you pointed that out, because they do deserve attention, and we should be thinking about how to bring home ownership to these people.
Yeah, and you kind of raised an interesting point that I have been thinking a lot about, just philosophically and frankly with my national homeownership, housing, real estate counterparts, in terms of where we are right now in homeownership. I'll say the last 15 years have been a bit of a wild ride. but really the last 4. This is kind of an unpopular opinion when I talk in front of realtor groups, but this is not a great time to be repping homeownership. With interest rates and inventory and student loan payments becoming, obligations again, the space that we're in right now, there are a lot of people who, like I just said, who don't think that homeownership is for them, but they think that it will never happen for them, that it's absolutely, completely unattainable. And you mentioned the American dream. The American dream has always been homeownership, but we're starting to see that shifting. And part of that could be from the fact that our country is becoming more and more multicultural, and other parts of the world look at homeownership much, much differently than we do. But the American dream is starting to be no longer rooted in homeownership. We're seeing now that it's starting to be rooted more in entrepreneurship. So that's been a little bit of an interesting shift to address. But in terms of, homeownership, people feeling like it's unattainable, I've been encouraging my colleagues to think about, well, how in the space that we're in right now, how can we kind of like nibble around the edges of it? Because if you just keep pressing on about homeownership, the only way you're going to be able to create any wealth for yourself, the only way you're going to make it in this world is homeownership. And people feel that they can't reach that, what is supposed to be their dream. I think a lot of people are going to feel really defeated, which, it is a tough thing to look at, having spent my whole career in this real estate and housing space. So I think we're in a little bit of a pivotal point in the housing space in this country in terms of how we're messaging about it and how we're approaching homeownership.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we see in articles all the time, rental rates are the highest we've ever seen, and more people aren't buying, and they are staying in their rentals longer. And it can be an easy thing to do right now, is to say like, no, I'm not going to entertain home ownership with all of those reasons you just mentioned. I have student loans, I have debt in other places, I have bad credit, I have, I can't put a 10% down payment on a home, all of these things. It's easy to put that to the side right now, I think, home ownership. So I agree. I think the way that we're phrasing and talking about it is going to be important, and it's going to be important to watch throughout the next few years, because we had just record activity during COVID, and we saw just things that we've never seen before in this real estate industry with houses, 100 offers on houses, and the chaos that COVID brought, because more people were in their homes and spent more time in their homes. But what does this look like now post COVID? And I think it's going to be interesting to see, and interesting to watch as this unfolds, kind of how we are reshaping home ownership in this country, and if that same value is going to exist. But it isn't all doom and gloom, and we are working on a lot of ways to make this possible. And one of the things that we mentioned in the beginning is your initiative that you're spearheading is the Keys to Unlock Dreams initiative. So I want to talk about that and hear a little bit more about the program. I think it exists here in Ohio, which is really cool. So tell us a little bit more about this program and how it's impacting states like Ohio.
Yeah, the Keys Unlock Dreams initiative started 3 years ago. And it's really the overarching goal of the initiative is to help close the racial homeownership and wealth gap. And so our focus is primarily on Black and Hispanic Latino individuals, because those are the folks who have experienced the greatest, have the greatest disparities and have experienced the greatest obstacles toward wealth attainment and homeownership. And so it started as a 3-year, 10-city initiative. Now, at the point we are now, it's January 2024. And so we've reached that 3-year point, but, we haven't solved all of the issues and problems, unfortunately. We didn't close up all the gaps and everything in the last couple of few years. So the initiative lives on. 10 cities was extremely I don't want to say aggressive, but it was
ambitious.
Very ambitious. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Ambitious. 3 years was 10 cities was very ambitious in terms of how we approached the initiative. But to your point, you mentioned Ohio being involved, and yes, the city of Columbus was one of those 10 cities. And now that we've reached this 3-year point, and we've evaluated our lessons learned and where did we create the greatest and strongest partnerships over the last 3 years, Columbus was definitely one of those cities. And so as we move forward, we're concentrating on 3 cities for right now, and those are Memphis, Baltimore, and Columbus, Ohio. So we partnered with one of our funders and organizational partners, I should say. They've been a really strong supporter of our work over the years, is Nationwide, of course, headquartered in Columbus, and Convergence. So the Mortgage Bankers Association Convergence initiative is also in Columbus. So we've partnered with those organizations as well. And speaking of the homeownership rates, it's interesting. I looked up before we spoke some research that we've done in the Columbus area, and discovered that from the 2021 to 2022 period, there was a slight decline in homeownership for all racial categories except for Black individuals. That category ticked up slightly. But overall, we have a research report, and if anyone wants to check it out, Keys Unlock Dreams website has all of our research reports. And so this data is, the report was released in 2022, so it's not the most up-to-date data. But we know that Columbus has a higher Black population than the U.S. average. We also know that Columbus has a lower than U.S. average homeownership rate across all racial and ethnic categories. Interestingly, between the 2010 to 2019 period, there was a decline in homeownership for all racial and ethnic categories except for Latinos. There was a pretty big upswing. And then finally, we know that credit scores in the Columbus, and when I say Columbus, we looked at both the city proper of Columbus and the Columbus MSA, which of course incorporates a lot of territory outside of the city itself. Those credit scores are on par with national averages. So some of these statistics that we saw played into why Columbus was chosen as one of our initiative focus cities, because we felt like, there was work to be done in the area on closing some of these gaps. And there's some fantastic organizations paying a lot of attention and putting some hard work, as they have been, for many decades. There's a lot of great organizations working on these housing issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome to hear, and sounds like there's a lot of really good opportunity, and just some of those stats that you mentioned. That's fascinating, and I think too with the Intel plant that's being built, right outside Columbus, that's going to bring a lot of attention to this need that exists. So that's awesome to hear that we're one of those cities you guys are focused on, and we're excited about the potential. Excited to see how we can help and be a part of the solution to the fair housing ongoing challenges. But Laurie, this was so awesome, and I want to thank you again for coming on, for sharing a little bit more about your world. We could keep going on this. This is such a huge and important topic. We could spend probably another hour chatting about this. But thank you so much for coming on, for sharing a little bit more about you and what you do, and just for the work that you do around making homeownership, an option for all. So I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for everything that you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I always love to stay in touch with my realtor friends and colleagues. So again, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners for tuning in, thank you guys. We'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.